Some influencers chase the perfect shot. Others chase the next viral upload. But sometimes, that chase becomes the last decision they ever make. I'm Nathan Cole, and here are 5 influencer cases that prove it. From an influencer who let hundreds of strangers blindfold him to another pushing 35 miles an hour with a modified seatbelt. It was December 9, 2017, in a large public square in Lisbon. Tourists gathered to take photos, street vendors served customers, and people moved between the riverfront and nearby streets the way they usually did on a weekend evening. Among the crowd stood Thabo Mensah, 27. He had left Accra 4 years earlier with very little money and only basic Portuguese, finding work on the night shift cleaning office buildings in the city center. He worked from 11 at night until 6 in the morning, usually alone, except for a security guard who sometimes left him a cup of coffee. Thabo was quiet and reserved, often feeling self-conscious about his accent whenever he spoke with strangers. That quiet personality eventually became his career. 2.5 years before this night, he uploaded a video of himself standing blindfolded in the same square with a sign inviting strangers to harmlessly prank him while he remained completely still and refused to react. The video earned more money than he normally made in a month of cleaning offices. Soon afterward, he left his job and continued making the same type of content, believing that staying completely calm was what kept people watching. By late 2017, the pranks had become more aggressive. Viewers had gone from placing hats on his head to covering him with shaving cream, pouring ice water over him, and drawing on his face with markers. It's honestly hard to watch knowing what happened later, but Thabo never seemed to believe the situation had become truly dangerous. Friends encouraged him to set simple ground rules for participants, but he worried that adding restrictions would make the videos feel less authentic. To celebrate the channel's 2.5-year anniversary, he announced a live stream with no planned ending, returning to the same public square where the series had begun. He expected a bigger audience than usual, but underestimated how many people would actually show up. It is baffling how someone can invite hundreds of people to a public space without having even a basic plan for safety. His previous live streams had attracted small crowds that never disrupted the area, so he did not coordinate with city authorities or arrange any form of crowd management. By 8 that evening, the audience had grown larger than anything he had experienced before. Spectators gradually spread beyond the pedestrian space and onto the edge of a nearby street that remained open to traffic. No barriers separated the crowd from the roadway, and no one was directing where people should stand. By 9, people were packed 3 rows deep around him with their phones raised. Earlier in the stream, several participants had already tried increasingly dramatic pranks to entertain the audience. Hoping to top them, a young man approached from behind and shoved Thabo hard with both hands. Blindfolded and unable to see what was happening, Thabo stumbled backward several steps, trying to regain his balance. It's gut-wrenching to think that a single thoughtless moment could ruin so many lives. His heel slipped off the curb before he realized he had reached the roadway. At that same moment, a delivery van traveling at about 12 miles an hour was making a slow turn around pedestrians near the intersection. The driver had almost no time to react before Thabo fell backward into the vehicle's path. Security cameras from nearby businesses and the van's dashcam recorded the incident, which investigators later reviewed. Witnesses said several people continued filming for a few seconds before anyone realized how serious the situation had become. The fact that people kept recording instead of helping really makes you wonder about the mindset of a crowd fueled by social media. A woman near the front called emergency services and paramedics came. However, Thabo was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner concluded that Thabo died from blunt force injuries to his head and chest caused by the collision with the van and the impact with the ground. He never had a chance to see the vehicle or protect himself before the collision. Toxicology tests found no drugs or alcohol in his system. The medical examiner classified the death as accidental, while police investigated the person who shoved him and later concluded there was insufficient evidence that he intended to cause fatal harm. Legal definitions aside, it's a tragedy that feels like a wake-up call for how we treat each other when we're caught up in the digital noise. Several months later, the city updated its public event guidance, requiring organizers expecting larger public gatherings to notify local authorities authorities in advance so crowd safety measures could be considered. Thabo's family in Accra could not afford the cost of bringing his body home, but within a day, viewers from his channel raised enough money to cover the expenses. I think what gets me about Thabo is that the danger didn't come from the challenge itself. It came from what happened when an uncontrolled crowd kept trying to outdo the last person. Our next story is different. This time, the biggest mistake happened before the camera even started recording. It was June 11th, 2020, in Slovenia. The road on the edge of town was still damp from overnight rain. Traffic was light, and a camera was mounted on a car parked at a side junction while its owner finished a phone call. Behind that quiet stood Nina Oblak, 30. She had spent 6 years as a designer before building a cycling channel that grew almost by accident, where she filmed practical fixes for a city full of bike lanes. She tested every idea herself before posting it, earning the trust of a loyal audience. 4 months earlier, she had quit her job entirely. It was a brave but risky move, giving up a steady paycheck for something that still had to prove it could work as a full-time career. Her newest project was a bicycle rigged with a small blender, powered by a friction drive against the rear wheel. Pedaling turned the blades. She had built it with a friend, and she had already filmed it working on a flat path. That footage was solid, but in her opinion, it was just plain boring. She kept deleting those takes. In a voice note her family later found, she said the successful runs looked like a product demo, not a real moment. She wanted the first sip on camera to feel unplanned, not staged. She scouted a shallow downhill stretch where she could coast without pedaling, freeing both hands to hold the smoothie toward her chest camera. She had tested the coasting, and she had tested the smile and the sip while standing still. But, and this is where it gets dangerous, she had never combined both while moving, hands off the bars, heading into a bend she had not even walked beforehand to check. On the morning of the ride, the road still held patches of wet leaves from the night's rain. She didn't check the surface or the bend before recording. She adjusted her camera, checked her reflection in a car mirror, and pushed off down the slope. The parked camera recorded the entire ride. Nina coasts into frame, one hand briefly leaving the handlebars to straighten the strap. About 4 seconds later, she lets go with both hands and lifts the cup toward her face, smiling into the lens. The bike, with nothing correcting its line, begins drifting toward the road's edge as the bend tightens ahead of her. It's incredibly frustrating because she remained focused on getting the perfect smile just as the bike began drifting toward the edge. She looks up about half a second too late. Her hand reaches for the bars and misses. The bike carries her past the low guardrail, and she drops nearly 13 feet onto rocky ground beside a ditch. The impact scatters the cup and part of the blender rig. She does not move after landing. The driver who owned the camera heard the crash and ran to the edge, calling emergency services immediately. He climbed down and found her unconscious but breathing. Because the location was far from the nearest station, paramedics did not arrive for 20 minutes. She was taken to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead that evening. The autopsy listed the cause of death as catastrophic head injuries, consistent with an unhelmeted fall onto rock from that height. It's truly hard to ignore that she had worn a helmet in almost every previous video, but not this one. Investigators concluded that the injuries were so severe they were unlikely to have been survivable. Her hands showed no injuries from bracing, suggesting she had little or no time to break or fall before impact. Her design studio later created a small non-profit funding helmet giveaways for cyclists. Her laptop held 11 earlier takes of the same ride, saved in a folder labeled More Authentic. The 12th take, the one that caused the accident, was the only one ever posted. Her family uploaded it themselves, unedited, days after the funeral. Watching one perfect take become someone's last never gets easier. But our next creator didn't remove a helmet or ignore the weather. He removed something much simpler and paid an even higher price. It was March 19, 2016. The gravel lot behind several industrial warehouses on the outskirts of Calgary was growing dark. Most workers had already gone home, and as daylight faded, judging distances across the open lot became much harder. Callum Breton was 25 years old. He wasn't a trained stunt performer or filmmaker. He had taught himself how to shoot videos through trial and error with 3 close friends and a drone. I've still found it surprising how quickly people convince themselves that enough practice can replace professional safety planning. His goal was to create videos that looked like one continuous shot, leaving viewers wondering how everything happened without a single cut. For his channel's first anniversary, Callum planned his most ambitious transition yet. The idea was to jump from a trampoline onto the roof of a slowly moving SUV, then leap into the bed of a pickup truck driving a short distance ahead. The vehicles would travel at low speed across the empty lot, while the drone captured the entire sequence in one uninterrupted take. It sounded manageable after several successful rehearsals, but every part of the stunt depended on precise timing and consistent spacing between the vehicles. Over 2 days, the group completed several practice runs. During every rehearsal, thick crash mats filled the truck bed, and one friend focused solely on monitoring the distance between the two vehicles using hand signals. The rehearsals went smoothly. When Callum reviewed the footage afterward, though, he became frustrated that the bright-colored crash mats were clearly visible from the drone. I felt they ruined the illusion that the stunt was happening naturally. Against his friend's advice, he decided the final take would be filmed without the mats. The spotter also moved out of position, so the truck bed would remain completely clear for the camera, leaving no one responsible for continuously monitoring the gap between the vehicles. Looking back, removing both layers of protection turned a controlled stunt into something far less predictable. By the time they prepared for the final attempt, daylight was fading quickly. Visibility across the lot wasn't poor enough to stop driving, but it was becoming harder to judge exact distances between moving vehicles. Without the spotter providing constant corrections, the drivers relied entirely on their own judgment to maintain the planned spacing. Doesn't seem like much, but even a small change in distance can completely alter a jump like this. When everyone signaled they were ready, the SUV and pickup accelerated to the same planned speed. Callum bounced from the trampoline onto the SUV's roof, slipped briefly on the metal surface, then recovered his balance. He immediately turned toward the pickup ahead and prepared for the second jump. As he pushed off, the spacing between the vehicles was no longer what they had practiced. The pickup had gradually moved farther ahead by only a few feet, enough to make the jump impossible. Callum reached the end of his leap before realizing he would come up short. He struck the top edge of the tailgate with his hip and ribs before falling into the gap between the vehicles. The SUV driver braked immediately, but there wasn't enough time to avoid him. The front tire struck Callum before the vehicle came to a stop. The drone continued recording overhead until one of his friends ran over and shut off the equipment. It's difficult to imagine how quickly a carefully planned stunt can fall apart once a single measurement changes. Someone called emergency services almost immediately. Paramedics arrived about 18 minutes later and found Callum critically injured. He was airlifted to a trauma center but never regained consciousness. He died 2 days later. The medical examiner determined that Callum died from a catastrophic traumatic brain injury and extensive internal injuries caused by the combined impacts. Investigators found that the group had removed the crash mats before the final take and confirmed that no commercial stunt coordinator or formal safety plan had been involved. Because everyone involved had voluntarily participated, and investigators found no evidence of criminal negligence beyond poor judgment. No criminal charges were filed. The case was later referenced in safety discussions about independently produced stunt videos and the importance of maintaining protective equipment during filming. I think what stays with me about Callum's story is that nothing failed except the decision-making. Aesthetics became more important than safety, and that single choice changed everything. Our next creator made a similar mistake, except the danger wasn't moving across the ground. It was wading beneath the water. If you're into these stories and want more real cases that dig into how ordinary decisions turn into extraordinary tragedies, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. It helps the channel more than you know, and we've still got some unbelievable stories ahead. Now back to the video. It was October 3rd, 2021. The water off Mole Bowl was calm, with visibility of more than 65 feet. Dive boats were heading toward the offshore reefs, while local fishermen worked closer to shore. Conditions were ideal for filming, and dozens of tourists were already out on the water before noon. Zayn Villanueva was 29 years old. He ran a small YouTube channel reviewing cameras and underwater filming equipment. Every episode ended with the same phrase: he never zoomed. If he wanted a better shot, he moved closer. It sounded like good photography advice, but over time, it became the way he approached almost everything he filmed. Looking back, it's unsettling how a simple filming philosophy gradually became something much riskier. A video of Zayn freediving near a thresher shark unexpectedly brought in hundreds of thousands of views. From then on, his audience became far more interested in close encounters with wildlife than camera setting. His videos slowly shifted away from equipment reviews and toward filming large larger marine animals, including whale sharks, sea turtles, and reef sharks. He still described each video as a lesson about composition or lighting, but he rarely acknowledged how much risk he was taking to capture those images. Before long, viewers were commenting less about the cameras and more about how close he could get to the animals. That afternoon, Zayn hired a local boat and an experienced dive guide to help him film near an offshore reef where large sharks had occasionally been reported by local divers. He wanted low-angle footage showing the water just below the surface, so he climbed onto the boat's narrow outrigger beam and leaned so far over the water that his shoulder extended past the edge of the beam. To steady the camera, he lowered his filming arm into the water, leaving much of his upper arm exposed below the surface. He refused suggestions to film from farther back because he believed the wider angle would make the animals look too distant. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened. The dive guide remained about 15 feet away, watching both Zayn and the surrounding area while the boat drifted slowly. The operator continued filming from inside the boat as Zayn shifted even farther out over the outrigger, lowering his arm farther beneath the surface until nearly his entire forearm and part of his upper arm were underwater to steady the camera and reduce reflections. Then, a large shape appeared below him. An immature tiger shark, estimated at about 8 feet long, approached slowly from deeper water. It circled once beneath the boat before turning back toward Zayn's arm, which was still extended well below the surface beside the submerged camera. The dive guide later told investigators the shark appeared to be investigating the movement rather than charging aggressively. Before anyone could warn him to pull back, the shark lunged upward and clamped onto the exposed upper portion of his arm near the shoulder where it was hanging closest to the surface. Panicked, Zayn instinctively sat upright and kept lifting his injured arm to inspect the wound instead of keeping it still. The dive guide reached him almost immediately and, with help from the boat operator, pulled him fully back onto the boat. The guide instructed him to stop moving while applying firm, direct pressure to the wound as the boat turned back toward shore. They radioed for emergency assistance, but despite their efforts, the bleeding remained severe. The boat reached the pier as quickly as conditions allowed, where paramedics, already responding to the emergency call, took over his care. Zayn was transported to a nearby hospital but died before arrival. The medical examiner determined that Zayn died from massive blood loss after the shark's bite severely damaged the brachial artery in his upper arm. Investigators found no evidence that wildlife regulations had been violated, but they noted that no protective barrier or specialized shark filming safety procedures had been used, despite intentionally attempting close footage of a large wild animal. Despite the dive guide's immediate first aid, the injury was too severe to control with the limited medical equipment available on the small boat before definitive treatment could be reached. Afterward, the companies sponsoring Zayn ended their partnerships and removed promotional posts featuring his channel. Marine safety organizations later cited the incident during educational presentations about photographing large marine animals, emphasizing that curiosity from wild sharks should never be mistaken for predictable behavior. I think what stays with me about Zayn's story is that he always believed getting closer meant getting a better shot. It worked until it didn't. Our final story shows that sometimes the greatest danger comes from something built to protect you. It was February 7th, 2014. A private test track outside Guadalajara was quiet that morning. Tire marks covered the asphalt as the crew prepared for another round of filming. It was behind that test that stood Ximena Zavala, 32. She had started her channel after a child car seat she bought for her nephew was recalled because of a safety defect. Instead of simply telling people what happened, she began breaking down why products failed and showing the evidence herself. Over time, her videos shifted toward reviewing inexpensive automotive accessories and gadgets sold online, and through late-night infomercials. She became known for testing every product herself instead of relying on demonstrations or manufacturer claims. I think that's what made people trust her. She wasn't trying to scare viewers, she wanted them to see the evidence for themselves. As her audience grew, engineers and safety professionals occasionally shared technical documents and public safety bulletins with her, trusting her platform to reach the public faster than corporate channels. And one of those products was a plastic seatbelt clip marketed as a comfort device that pulled the shoulder belt away from the wearer's neck. Road safety experts had already warned that accessories like it could interfere with how a seatbelt distributes crash forces during a collision. experiment, which sounds like a terrifyingly simple way to make a life-saving tool fail, but the product was still widely available online. Ximena decided to test the claim herself. She rented a closed test track outside Guadalajara, hired a licensed stunt coordinator, and kept 2 paramedics on standby. The goal was to compare a standard seatbelt with the same seatbelt fitted with the aftermarket clip during a controlled barrier impact. The first test took place the previous day at about 15 miles an hour. The vehicle struck the padded barrier exactly as planned. Ximena walked away without injury, and the footage showed only limited movement inside the cabin. According to the stunt coordinator's later statement to investigators, he considered the demonstration complete and advised against increasing the speed because the production vehicle and temporary barrier setup had only been prepared for low-speed testing. Personally, this is the point where I wish the project had ended. The first test had already answered the question. The following afternoon, the crew prepared for another run. Production notes later reviewed by investigators showed the planned impact speed had been increased to just under 35 miles an hour. Crew members later told investigators that Ximena believed the lower speed impact wasn't representative of the kinds of crashes most drivers actually survive on city roads, and that she wanted to show viewers how the aftermarket clip would behave in a more realistic collision. The coordinator again warned that the vehicle and barrier setup weren't designed for the higher speed, but filming continued after everything was reset. One camera mounted inside the vehicle and another positioned beside the track captured the entire collision. As the car struck the barrier, investigators observed that the shoulder belt no longer rested across the center of Ximena's chest. Instead, the aftermarket clip had redirected the belt closer to her neck, a chilling reminder of how easily a small modification can cross a line you can't uncross, meaning that during the rapid forward movement, the restraint no longer controlled her upper body the way the original seatbelt was designed to. Although the driver's airbag deployed as expected, airbags are designed to work with a properly positioned seatbelt. Because her torso rotated sideways instead of staying centered in front of the airbag, her head moved outside its intended protection zone and struck the driver's side A-pillar before the movement stopped. Crew members ran to the vehicle immediately after the impact. Paramedics reached Ximena in less than a minute and rushed her to the nearest trauma center, but she died before arriving at the hospital. The autopsy determined that Ximena died from severe head, neck, and upper spinal injuries caused by blunt force trauma during the collision. Toxicology testing found no alcohol or drugs in her system. Investigators also examined the damaged restraint system and concluded that the aftermarket clip had changed the shoulder belt's position, reducing its ability to restrain the upper body during the crash. Their report found no evidence of mechanical failure in the vehicle itself. Within days, consumer safety organizations renewed warnings against aftermarket seatbelt positioning devices, and the manufacturer removed the product from sale while conducting what it described as an internal review. Investigators did not recommend criminal charges, but criticized the safety decisions that led to the crash. Ximena's sister later preserved the channel as an archive of her product investigations, allowing viewers to continue accessing the testing and safety information she had spent years documenting. What stays with me is that Ximena wasn't chasing danger. She was trying to verify whether a product people trusted was actually safe, and the very test meant to protect others ended up costing her life.